life, wisdom. Is it true that the food chemicals or food additives in the foods we eat could actually affect our health or make us sick?
Absolutely. Anything you put in your body is going to affect how your body functions. And that's what health translates to, is proper functioning. You've got to think of, even in plants, there are chemicals. And many times the chemicals that are beneficial to us are the stress chemicals the plant made, because it was stressed, and it kind of communicates or alerts us and gets our body ready. So a few molecules might be all it takes, and that gets into our body and meets a receptor, or something happens and our body responds. And that can be real good at the right dose. But if you process the food, you may actually concentrate some things that were in a little bit beneficial, but in a lot harmful. And you may probably throw away things that you also needed in conjunction.
Right.
But there's a lot of communication going on. And whatever you choose to put in your body, that's where most of it comes from, you're going to be giving different communication.
So as an example, you know, one of the things we talk about a lot on the channel is refined flour and refined sugar. And so you're taking this whole grain or this whole sugar beet or whatever, you're stripping out all the fiber, you're stripping out all this other stuff. So you have a really highly refined amount of, you know, whatever that is. You know, it's been said that we're actually ingesting pharmacological doses of sugar and these different chemicals, because the concentration that they are present in processed foods is way higher,
it's overwhelming,
than you would ever find in an actual fruit or an actual natural piece of food.
Yeah, I have a natural digestive process. And we all kind of know the digestive system. You know, I start in the mouth and end up eliminating. If I even do, I'm not even a fan necessarily of vegetable juicing, because you may concentrate things. But if you look at all the processed food, you have such a high concentration, and the body may have had symptoms to handle a smaller amount, but it doesn't know what to do with that larger amount.
Right. And then if we start talking about actual food chemicals or food additives that aren't just something, you know, refined and extracted from a plant. This is actually, you know, they talk about food scientists.
New to nature molecules. Yeah.
Right. That are kind of, you know, creating food chemicals like MSG, monosodium glutamate, or EDTA. There's a lot of, you know, TBHQ. There's tons of different, you know, food chemicals and food additives. But, I mean, isn't it in such a small amount? You know, because it always will say less than 2% of the following, da-da-da-da-da. Isn't it in such a small amount that it wouldn't really affect us? Or is that not true?
Yes and no. First of all, there are many things that in a small amount can be beneficial. There's a whole science called xenohormesis. And xeno means foreign or from the environment. The hormetic effect is in Greek, it meant to induce an action or cause something to happen. So they talk about a small amount of something having a big reaction or response. Okay. So in studying xenohormesis, they find that a small amount of something has benefit, turns things on, whatever. But if I increase the amount, I start getting negative effects to a point that it may even become a true toxin. And so toxicologists, fortunately or unfortunately, have based their studies on the fact that, okay, how much of this to be a lethal dose? Or how much of this to start causing a symptom? So they start saying that a certain amount is generally regarded as safe. That's a classification. But now you have to consider, okay, what about two things and how they might interact?
Right.
And what about over time, how much it might accumulate? Well, suddenly I've changed the whole picture. And people seem to assume that if something's generally safe, well, I'll go ahead and eat this snack because there's just a little bit of that pesticide in there, so it won't hurt me.
Just a little bit of red 40.
Just a little bit of food coloring or whatever. But over time, I might just accumulate a larger dose, but also I might have interactions. We don't tend to think about that. Right. You have to realize that everything you choose to put in is going to generate a response. And I have to kind of put a little forethought into that. If my body evolved with certain things, it's probably safer to use than it is to take something off a chemist's bench.
Right.
And, you know, that xenohormetic effect ends up creating a lot of problems for people. As an example, there are many studies being done on genetics, and they find that the genes actually change the response even in their configuration, and that's response to things that you're putting in the body. And well, let's take many medications, for example. We do a test in our office to see if medications are going to be able to be safely and effectively used. So I run across people who tell me, well, I've been taking this drug for several months and I haven't felt anything. But maybe their body is tolerating just that amount. Because I've had several occasions where, let's say somebody's taking medications and are eating bad food and they seem to be handling it. But then they get a spider bite or a bee sting or they get a viral infection. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they develop lupus or some other fairly serious situation. Well, they didn't just get that disease. There was a mechanism and there was a kind of a building and a crescendo, which was the disease. I want people to avoid that. But if we don't think about the smaller things, if we allow the body to accumulate and get the wrong communication, then we have that thing happen to us. Now, everybody's going to blame the virus or they're going to blame the bee or whatever happened. But really, that was the last straw, not the actual cause.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I actually had a personal experience where I got a bug bite. I don't really know what bug it was. And it got infected and it got real swollen. And they put me on, 10 days of antibiotics. Okay. Of course, I took my 10 days of antibiotics. And on the 10th day, I was really good. The swelling had gone down. Everything was great. I was just like, oh yeah, I'm just on my last day of antibiotics. And on the 10th day, I went to sleep. I woke up. My ankles were more swollen than they had been originally. I rushed back to the hospital and she said, oh yeah, you had an allergic reaction to the antibiotic. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I took it for 10 days and it seemed to help. And she said, yeah, well, there's some people who can take something for 10 years and all of a sudden one day they become allergic to it or it accumulates to the point, and it can actually be fatal in some people. Right. And that kind of, really struck a chord, but it's a great example of how not only can our body's reaction to something change, but the accumulation of those things actually can have a really significant effect on how our bodies react.
It can. You're increasing the dose over time, but it doesn't even have to be that way. Like I said, you're communicating things are going to create a certain function. You're setting up mechanisms, how the body's going to respond to things. And that last event that your body can't handle, that's when you have, whether you call it signs, symptoms, disease, it's the mechanism before that you have to consider.
Right.
And we're so worried these days about things that mimic hormones and cause hormone disruption, yet people are using plenty of plastics and chemicals that in a small amount we know are disrupting that function. Mm-hmm. And then at one point they get this big disease and they blame it on, I don't know, their parents or the ozone layer or whatever. Well, they set up the dysfunction and then things didn't work. Right. You have to put the two together.
And I think that's a really interesting thing to consider because, back to that idea of, it's less than 2% of, it's a really small amount of. Well, once you start looking at food labels, I had this realization that, okay, well, if there's red 40 in, 8 different things that I might be consuming over the course of the day, and there are things that I consume often, how do they have any idea how much of these things any person is actually consuming? How do you have any idea?
They don't. You would be the only one that can add that up.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about accumulation of these chemicals. Why would the body want to accumulate something that could be harmful? How does that happen?
Well, you've only got 2 choices. You can either keep something in the body or you can eliminate it. And you do have a detoxification system. It's there. It evolved with your entire body, and it's there to get rid of your own waste products. Because just sitting here, we're making some waste products, and our body's hopefully taking care of them. And the ultimate is to eliminate them. Let's get rid of them. It's a process called biotransformation. It's a real complicated chemical process that your body can accomplish to make something water soluble so that it can be gotten rid of. Well, what if I can't do that? What if that system's not functioning as well? Or what if genetically I don't have as good a system as you do? Now, there are no bad genes. In certain situations, everybody has an advantage over somebody else. I mean, it's just what we've adapted to and how our body's responding. But if that system's not working, what's my other choice?
To hold on to it, to accumulate it somewhere in the body.
Now I'm going to slip it under the rug somewhere. I can't transform it. I can't get rid of it. So I'm going to store it somewhere. Often it's in fatty tissues.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's gone. Maybe I've made it a bit inert. Somewhere where it's safe for the moment, but it's still there and it can still bother me. And then I'm adding more to it.
Yes.
So take people that are constipated, for example. It's a daily problem of accumulating stuff that you're not going to get rid of and reabsorbing it and just getting loaded.
Right.
And when the load's high enough, that's when you're going to start seeing symptoms. Your body can only take so much.
I've heard that referred to as the body burden.
Right.
Kind of the accumulation of all the different things over the course of our lives. And I think that's really interesting that you kind of point out that if the detoxification abilities, the ability of our body to detoxify and to get rid of the things that we don't need anymore, the medications that may be toxic or the food chemicals or whatever, that actually, you know, when we're talking about functional medicine and how certain things in the body can start dysfunctioning and cause disease, just this process of the body being able to detoxify itself and eliminate the way it needs to. Yes. Seems like that would be a big one, that if you lost the function, if your body lost its ability to detoxify and eliminate, that alone could, you know, be a causative factor in all kinds of different diseases. The
biological systems have to work in a symphony. They have to work together. We could try to say, okay, who's the most important system? Many people talk about the energy system, but that detoxification system is extremely important as well. And those systems can't work in a toxic environment.
Right.
So you've got to keep everything clean. And the more that you're adding in each day, you've got to start thinking about what messages am I giving to my body? Mm-hmm. It's not that you have to talk to every piece of food that you put in, but with a little bit of forethought, you can avoid a lot of the problems.
Right.
And what message do you want to communicate? I'm sure we all want to be healthy, but are you doing what it takes to get there?
Right. So this would be one of the primary reasons that you recommend eating natural foods and avoiding the processed foods, avoiding what we might call frankenfoods, something with a really long ingredient list, because we will have that body burden that accumulates over time and can potentially affect our health.
Right. Well, if I eat a plant, I'll get a little protein, I'll get some vitamins, minerals. We want to search and get those things. But there's a lot of chemicals the plant is making. And I can tend to get, especially if it's a locally grown plant, I'm living in the same environment, I can pick up a lot of communication from that plant. Mm-hmm. It's gonna share its experience with me. And it's gonna get my body to get ready for any possible problems, whatever it is. And this is where they're studying this process of xenohormesis, this communicated effect. Whereas if I eat something that came out of some big industrial complex, and a lot of the chemicals that might have been beneficial to me are thrown away, the nutrients, and they've concentrated things, like you said, like sugar or other things, and then they've added even more chemicals to enhance the taste or for shelf life or whatever.
Oh, you name it.
There's a completely different message coming here.
Right.
And it's something my body probably isn't going to deal with very well.
Right.
Because it's something it hasn't seen necessarily before. Maybe someday we'll be advanced enough or evolve enough so we can eat junk food, but we're not there yet. So
right. I think that's a really important point to consider, you know, for however many, you know, generations and lifetimes that human beings have survived and have grown accustomed to eating these certain foods that grow out of the ground, versus the modern American diet now is probably, you know, 70% to maybe even higher than that, processed foods that didn't even exist until the last maybe 50 to 100 years. Correct. I mean, literally, we're not even in existence. No human before had ever eaten that particular food or that particular chemical or something up until now. And then we're seeing chronic disease, obesity, all of these different diseases that, as you've pointed out in other videos, generally stem from the body's inability to function. You know, there's something has destroyed the body's ability to function. You end up with a chronic disease. As you see these chronic disease rates rising and kind of integrate that with what you're saying about these chemicals and how they can affect us, I think it definitely gives us really good reason to, like you said, put a little foresight into what we put in our bodies. You know, read the ingredient label, opt for whole natural foods that are in their natural state. One of the kind of tips that I like to use when I'm talking to my health coaching clients is, if you can imagine that ingredient, you know, if you could go to a search engine and search for images and get a bunch of pictures of this ingredient. So, of course, you know, for like spinach, for instance, you can think about what spinach looks like. You could think about a Google image, for instance, of that. But something like trichloroethane. There's no Google image for something like that. You can't imagine how that came. You can't imagine it growing out of the ground. You can't imagine where it came from. And
Right.
that just for me personally has kind of been a helpful, tactic in trying to judge if something's really going to be healthy for me or not.
I think that's a good criteria. And again, if you want to think about chronic disease or where problems come from, it is dysfunction. When the body's working, there is no disease.
Mm-hmm.
Our whole weight loss program is predicated on that. And it's a very successful program. And what we do is we work with people to get their body working better. And then suddenly they don't have a weight problem because the weight's gone.
Right.
And it's the same for, I would say, any disease. If you enhance or create function, then you're actually curing disease.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, okay, today I have this and this, give me the label and then give me a pill for it. You're just addressing the result of that dysfunction.
Right. Trying to maybe, minimize the symptoms or make the symptoms more livable. So you can actually tolerate them.
I can make you comfortable, but if we want to solve the problem, I have to figure out what this is coming from.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really, really enlightening discussion.
It's been good to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you will give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Share your questions, your video requests, and certainly any comments you have about what we've discussed today in the comments section. I hope you will subscribe to Psyche Truth. We are dedicated to helping you take control of your health and happiness. I'm Psyche Truth correspondent Karina Rachel. Thank you so much for watching.